I've got a feeling with this thing that if you have a strong idea of what you want to do and believe in pushing it through, then you're a, in inverted commas, dictator, and if you're not, then you're weak. And, you know, he pays your money and he takes your choice on that one.
This Thursday, exactly 1,000 days after he'd become Prime Minister, Toни Blaiṛ.
We'll be running up to the Lisbon Council now in March. It's fantastically important that we build a very clear set of alliances and arguments in the run-up to that summit.
It's in the nature of the job that every Prime Minister has to play many parts. But ever since he first came to power, there have been questions about who is the real Toni Blaiṛ. Following him as he goes about his duties reveals the different sides of the Prime Minister's personality. A reception at Lancaster House for troops who'd served in Kosovo. One officer tells him that serving on the front line is less hazardous than Prime Minister's question time.
But actually, it's no worse than Prime Minister's question time.
We haven't yet had a fatality at Prime Minister's question time. But you never know.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, pray silence for the Prime Minister.
Right, thank you. Well, everyone, welcome here this evening, and it's a great pleasure to see you all tonight. And I just wanted to say a few things. This is by way of a party, so it's not a great speech-making occasion. You'll be delighted to know. But I just wanted to say really a word of particular thanks for all the work that the armed services are doing at the present time and have done over the past few months, but over the past couple of years since I've been Prime Minister of this country. So is my wife at the front as well, as turns up right on cue. I always suspect you were going off with a soldier, but anyway. So I shouldn't say that. And indeed, any of the armed forces, to be quite honest about it. But we won't say anything about that. It's probably a very unwise and indiscreet remark for which I will pay a price later.
In his first 1,000 days, his many roles have included that of war leader, peace broker, expectant father, and populist politician.
Hi. Yeah, nice to see you. You're right.
He arrives in Manchester for a walkabout.
I'm afraid I've not done well in that. Yeah. Hi. Nice to see you. Yeah, nice to see you.
And Blair shows himself to be a man for all seasons.
Oh, right, which part of Australia from? Adelaide. Yeah, I lived there for 3 years when I was a little kid.
Next, he meets a French woman who tells him that she's written to him often, but has had no reply.
Mais c'est vrai,
Je suis désolé.
Non, mais c'est vrai.
Vous avez écrit quand?
J'ai écrit tout le temps.
Tout le
temps, oui.
Et votre nom?
Madame Taylor. Vous connaissez
Alors,
mon nom. Je vous
vais
en prie.
vérifier.
Merci.
I don't know what's happening.
Toni Blaiṛ can be his own best spin doctor.
Are you all right, mate? West. Yeah, when you come stand by me, you get the picture. Yeah. You come sit here. There we are.
Blair says that he likes to speak directly to the people and that he's taken more questions from the public on radio phone-ins than any previous Prime Minister. Today, the first call is from a single mother.
That choice to look after my own children.
Tracy, the answer to your question is you are able to look after your children.
I can look after my own children.
Yes.
I can say that mothering is the reason why I don't want to take up work, and that will be accepted.
You are perfectly entitled to do that, but what I'm saying to you is the purpose of this interview is not to force you into anything, but to open up a choice to
so
you.
Mothering is still a justified profession in your eyes.
Well, no one has ever said anything different.
After a weekend in his Durham constituency, Blair returns to number 10, accompanied by the ever-present red boxes. The greatest challenge facing all Prime Ministers is to prevent themselves being overwhelmed by the demands of the job.
The thing that you desire most when you're doing this job, or at least I do, is to lead as normal a life as you conceivably can, given the fact that it's difficult. And the trouble with this job and this position is that, in a sense, everything is a sort of conspiracy against you leading a normal life. You know, all the security, the fact you've got to live in Downing Street because it really isn't practical to live anywhere else. You know, there's just all these things put barriers between you and people, and that's why I spend a lot of my time going out and actually seeing people.
Hi, how are you? You got the morning off school, have you?
Even after 1,000 days, many people are still not sure exactly what Blair really stands for as a politician.
I was never really in politics. I never grew up as a politician. I don't feel myself a politician even now. I don't think of myself as a politician in that sense of being someone who's, you know, whose whole sort of driving force in life is politics.
Because you were an actor at school and then university. How much of an actor do you think you still have to be as Prime Minister?
Look, I mean, politics is a bit like the law in the sense, or the media, in the sense there's a bit of it when you're on show. You know, you're on show, so there's a bit of it that's acting to that extent, but don't confuse it with real life, or with real problems and real solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's some people say they're not quite sure which is your real face. And so they think that your acting skills are all part of this. I mean, your old friend Paul Johnson more or less wrote this, didn't he?
Yeah, well, people can think what they like, really, in the end. I mean, you know, there's no point in... I am what I am within myself. And the one thing I'm quite sure about is, I mean, I'll do this job to the best of my ability whilst people want me to do it. I'll try and achieve the things that I believe I can achieve for this country. I have a very strong vision for where Britain needs to be. I think I know some of the answers for that, which may sound a bit arrogant, but I think I do know some of the things where the politics of this country's got to be for the 21st century. But, you know, what I am as an individual, that's for me.
His early life provides clues as to who Blair really is and what motivates him as Prime Minister. He grew up in Durham, the son of a Tory family. He was sent to Fettes, the top Edinburgh public school. There he was something of a rebel, but always had the ability to use his charm to talk his way out of trouble. He wasn't seen as natural prefect material. He went up to Oxford and was lead singer in a pop group called Ugly Rumours, but he took no part in student politics.
I was part of that generation that I think is very much the post-60s generation. I wasn't a 60s student. I was coming out of university in the mid-70s when life was getting harder and tougher, when the shortcomings of, you know, traditional socialist analysis were very, very clear. And yet, on the other hand, I wasn't a Tory. I mean, I knew that. You know, sometimes you just know these things. I knew I wasn't a Tory. I wasn't of that part of politics at all.
Although your father was a Tory.
My dad was a Tory, but although my dad was a Tory in a different type of way. I mean, I've always had this view that his generation became conservatives because they thought the Labour Party was about holding you back. If you did well, you better become a conservative because the Labour Party was against you doing well. And of course, that was always one of the things I wanted to change about the Labour Party. Well, I don't know about that, but the idea of your beliefs being something that resulted in action was what, in a sense, he brought to the development of my philosophy. In other words, your religious belief wasn't something that shut you away from the world, but something that meant that you had to go out and act.
Blair came down to London from Oxford with an upper second-class degree in law. He wanted to train as a barrister and applied to join the chambers of a fast-rising QC, Derry Irvine, who's now the Lord Chancellor. Although Lord Irvine was initially inclined to turn him down, Blair managed to talk Irvine into signing him on.
No, it wasn't really. But as it turned out, it was a very good grounding and training for politics. But I didn't go into the law with the specific idea of going into politics.
And it was also, of course, where you met Cherie Booth.
That's right.
How did that happen?
We were going together to try and get some scholarship, I think. And we were both being interviewed at the same time, so that's when we first met. Needless to say, she got the scholarship and I didn't. But and then we were both pupils together with Derry Irvine.
And could he see that there was a future between the two of you, do you think?
I don't know. I suppose you better ask him about that, really. We went to lunch and he diplomatically cleared off at some point. And it's one of these things that happens sometimes. You suddenly find that what was at the back of your mind about someone comes to the front of your mind in a rather dramatic way, and it did. But so
So how long did
we fell in love and married.
How long did the lunch last?
Oh, I don't know. I think it went on quite a long time. But it wasn't really about the lunch, if you see what I mean.
Blair first sought to become a politician at one of the lowest points in Labour's fortunes. The luck that would mark his career was already in evidence as the Labour Party leader Michael Foot came to help his 1982 by-election campaign in the solid Tory seat of Beaconsfield.
At the time, the Labour Party organisation was a joke, really. When I went to ask about the defence policy, I was asked to take my pick, really. I mean, there were any number of 3 or 4 I could choose from whatever spokesman happened to be speaking on the particular day, and the whole sense was of an organisation that really wasn't capable of putting across a proper political message. And meantime, of course, the Conservatives had a tip-top professional organisation with Saatchi and all the rest of it, and people said, well, that's very professional of them. Michael Foot and I got on extremely well, and I think there's some footage from coming out of the pub where we were, where we'd had lunch. It was the Newsnight interview with Michael Foot that was the single most important thing in getting the Sedgefield nomination, about a year later.
As parliamentary candidate for the safe Labour seat of Sedgefield in County Durham, Blair's general election address followed the prevailing left-wing orthodoxy: pro-CND, anti-common market, pro-tax and spend. But once he became an MP in 1983, he drew the lesson of his party's disastrous election defeat.
The image of the Labour Party has got to be an image that's more dynamic, more modern, more suited to the 1980s. I don't actually think it's nearly so much a matter of right and left as people make it out. What I do think is that it's a matter of style. The truth is, we live in a different world now. We live in a world where over 50% of the population in this country are owner-occupiers. We live in a population where there are large numbers of people now employed in the service industries rather than manufacturing industries, and that means a change in attitude, and a change in attitude that we've got to catch up to.
But back in Sedgefield, the new MP discovered that his local activists had not drawn the same lessons from Mrs Thatcher's landslide election victory. At a post-mortem meeting, he came up against Labour's deeply held suspicion of change.
I just got up and said what I thought. I said, look, we're like, black and white TVs in a colour TV age. I mean, we're not at the races when it comes to understanding what people here are saying. And what had struck me particularly, was that you could have said all that about the South, but in fact I'd discovered the same thing in the North. People in my own constituency, if they were aged 25, 30, 35 and wanted to get on in life, felt the Labour Party wasn't for them. So I made a completely straight down the line exactly what I thought, and of course the audience hated it, and I got as I say, pretty well chastened for it. But I always remember coming out of the meeting and saying to my agent, God, it was John Burton, that was absolutely terrible. I can't believe how I got myself into that situation. And he said to me, you must never ever forget that what you were saying was right. He said, you've got to find ways of saying it, but don't believe that what you were saying was wrong, because it's right.
Tony Blair MP is a Labour Treasury spokesman and is the youngest member of Neil Kinnock's youthful frontbench team. He achieved that promotion last autumn after only a year in the Commons, a year in which he made his mark opposing the government's 1984 trade union legislation.
Why do you think you rose so rapidly?
Well, that was for the same reason. That because every time the Labour Party turned around and said, well, let's address the public, they'd say, well, who looks vaguely respectable and can talk in a language that the public might find appealing. So I was wheeled out. So I was very lucky. I was the beneficiary of that, in a sense.